Our top focus remains on South Africa. The newly signed land seizure law, which has triggered tensions with the United States, has now been challenged at a court by a party in the country's ruling government coalition. South Africa's second largest party, the Democratic Alliance, or the DA, which is also a coalition member with President Cyril Ramaphosa's African National Congress, has filed a court case against the controversial Land Expropriation Act. The law allows the government to seize farmland without any compensation under some circumstances. The DA has firmly rejected the law, calling it unconstitutional and undemocratic. It says no government should be given such sweeping powers to expropriate property without compensation. The party is a strong advocate of white rights and was once a rival of Ramaphosa's ANC. However, it joined the government last year after the ANC lost its parliamentary majority for the first time in 30 years. Despite joining hands, the two parties remain divided on foreign and internal matters, and land reforms is a key issue dividing the Ramaphosa government. Last month, President Ramaphosa signed a bill into law that allows the government to seize land without paying compensation. Even 30 years after the end of racial apartheid system, white South Africans own over 70% of farmland, despite their population being about 8%. On the other hand, only 4% of privately held land is owned by black South Africans, who make up nearly 80% of the country's 60 million residents. President Ramaphosa has repeatedly clarified that the law will not allow any forceful seizures, and no land has been confiscated yet. But the law has invoked anger and criticism all the way to the United States of America. US President Donald Trump has frozen foreign aid to South Africa, alleging that land is being confiscated already. He has called the law a violation of human rights. Not just this, he has also offered to resettle South African farmers and their families as refugees in the United States. However, most of the leading groups advocating white rights in South Africa have turned down Trump's offer. Apart from Trump, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump appointee and tech billionaire Elon Musk have also attacked South Africa. Rubio is boycotting a G20 meet in Johannesburg this month, while Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa, has called the land seizure law openly racist. In the past, he accused South African government of doing too little to stop what he has referred to as a genocide against white farmers. Meanwhile, President Ramaphosa says the U.S. president's actions were based on a campaign of misinformation and propaganda to misrepresent South Africa. He said he will send envoys to the various countries to explain the government's recent policy changes, including the Expropriation Act. And as the land reforms row escalates, it has deeply divided South Africa. Former President Jacob Zuma's MK party has also formally laid treason charges against the pro-white organization AfriForum, accusing it of lobbying foreign powers to act against South Africa's sovereignty and economic interests. Is South Africa's land law really anti-white? And how will the country overcome the difficulties it has triggered internally and to its foreign relations? Now, to discuss further, we have with us Ruth Hall, a professor at the Institute for Poverty and Land and Agrarian Studies at the University of the Western Cape. She is joining us live from Cape Town. Thank you for being with us, Professor.
Thank you.
Now, the US president has criticized South Africa's land seizure law as being anti-white. How valid are these claims, and how does this narrative impact South Africa's international relations?
Thanks for the opportunity. Firstly, this is based on fake news. It's very unfortunate that the head of state of the United States would promote such a misrepresentation. We have a democratic constitution in South Africa that confirms that there are property rights in this country, but also the state has a responsibility to redistribute rights to land, including to Black South Africans who were dispossessed through apartheid. So in South Africa, we do not have a blanket rule against any kind of expropriation. In fact, our constitution says that our government can expropriate. Let's just be very clear. South Africa is not alone in this. Most democratic governments around the world have a right of eminent domain, where the state may acquire property without the consent of the owner for a variety of public purposes or in the public interest. The United States itself has this right of eminent domain. So what we're seeing here is that a law that does not allow seizure or confiscation of land, but expropriation through a legal process with recourse to the courts. That law was passed by a democratic government. It's in line with our constitution. It was promulgated by Parliament just about last year in March, and it's now been signed into law by the president. It is his duty to sign into law a legal constitutional law passed by our Parliament. So I think that what we're seeing here is that certain groups interpret this as being racial. It is not racial. There is no mention of race in this law at all.
Right, and Professor, the DA has taken the Expropriation Act, the land seizure law, effectively to court, and they have been calling it unconstitutional. What are the key legal arguments in their challenge, and what implications could a court ruling against the law have on the government and the South African land reform policy?
Okay. Well, firstly, I think that we must be clear that the law itself allows a minister to take a decision to expropriate property, and that decision has to go through a very particular set of legal and administrative steps. There are 7 very long steps that will take about between 6 to 12 months, with opportunities for the property owner to object, respond, for anyone else affected to participate in a consultation process. The matter can be referred to a court. Now, what many of the critics of the Act are saying is that in this process, you will have a state versus a private citizen, and that it cannot be that there is an administrative process. It should always be decided by the courts, they are arguing. There are very few cases in which there might be no compensation, and the Act specifically sets out these very particular situations where the land has been abandoned, where it's held purely for speculation, where it is the product of corrupt or criminal activities, or where it's owned by an organ of state and not used for its proper purpose. So these are very exceptional cases. What is not allowed under the Act is that, for instance, a productive farm could be taken without compensation. The interesting thing here is, in fact, the organization representing white commercial farmers has not joined this legal challenge. They're happy to sit back and wait and don't object in principle to expropriation. So I think that what we've got here is actually a lot of people who are most likely to be directly affected, not calling foul over this law. But a number of interest groups have decided to really up the ante and make this into an international political football. It's clearly playing into a moment where geopolitically there is a lot of reason for Donald Trump to be putting pressure on South Africa. And I think that it's a concern for the whole world when power is used internationally in this fashion.
Yeah, and on that, what could the implications, the wider ripple effects be, given that the Democratic Alliance is a part of the ruling coalition of the GNU? How will this change or play out in the political landscape in South Africa today?
Yes, you're correct. Effectively, we are into an era of coalition politics, which is quite new for South Africa. And the African National Congress cannot make up its 50% majority without the Democratic Alliance. But further than that, I think we must be clear that that the Democratic Alliance, even though it's a smaller party, needs to be in government to be able to deliver something to its voter base. I don't think that many analysts right now are expecting this to be a factor that would bring down our coalition. So that's not what is expected. I think the fallout is much more significant in terms of our international relations. Let's be clear that this is not in isolation. It is in a context where President Trump has criticized South Africa's referral of a case against the State of Israel to the International Criminal Court of Justice.
Yeah.
So this is direct retaliation for that, for our alliance with the BRICS countries, and for being perceived to be disloyal to the US in international affairs. And far more significant, a fear among white farmers in South Africa. They're not so much worried about expropriation. The much bigger immediate fear is that President Trump may remove South Africa from our preferential trade agreement with the US, that, like other African countries, gives us cheaper access into American markets. So this would bring a massive economic disadvantage to South Africans, including those who are exporting food to the US. So I think it's not correct to interpret this as being President Trump standing in alignment with white commercial farmers. This is about playing a geopolitical game and asking South Africa to step in line with the US.
Absolutely. Professor, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa. It was great to chat with you and your analysis and your interpretation of this. Very much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
We're calling the show Vantage. We hope you like what we put together for you. Touted as the minimum two-way defense from that video. India's neighbors were the first to send the special edition of Vantage live from the White House throughout the week. Yes, Hindu Mandir we're on our way to Tel Aviv. Measure, but it's also the perfect way to drive.
I don't think that
Prime Minister of Bhutan, Cyril, welcome to
60% of the world's
office. Prime Minister Modi did the iron.
We were actually
How are you doing? How do you like? It's been 1 year since that meeting. Iron bars separate you from the outside. Out the vote efforts. Trump had, it says, and at $4.3 trillion, 300 billion by 2030. That's what we need to tackle climate change.